A sleek obsidian black Aston Martin, DB11, tore through the city streets, its engine a low growl of pure power. Behind the wheel, Christopher Davies, a man whose net worth was discussed in financial journals, glanced at the passenger seat. There, Brooke Summers, stunning and artfully distressed, clutched her stomach. This was an emergency, a detour from his carefully planned life. His phone buzzed on the console, flashing a picture of his pregnant wife, Jessica. He ignored it. He was busy being the hero for the woman beside him. He pulled into the exclusive private entrance of the city's most prestigious medical facility, a place built for the elite. He was about to demand the best for the best. He had no idea he was a guest in a kingdom he never knew existed, walking into a judgment he could never have foreseen. The Hartman Medical Center wasn't just a hospital, it was a statement. Its gleaming glass and steel facade rose into the skyline like a monument to modern medicine and immense wealth. Valets in crisp grey uniforms moved with silent efficiency accustomed to the city's most powerful figures. Christopher Davies didn't wait for one. He brought the Aston Martin to a screeching halt directly in front of the main entrance, leaving the engine running as he vaulted out. "Help, I need a doctor. Now!" He barked, his voice accustomed to instant obedience. He rounded the car to help Brooke, who managed a convincingly feeble moan as she leaned heavily against him. She was an actress by ambition, and today she was giving the performance of a lifetime. A slight dizzy spell after a champagne brunch had been masterfully spun into a potential medical crisis that required Christopher's immediate undivided attention. "My stomach," she whispered, her hand splayed dramatically below her ribs. "It's a sharp pain, Chris. It came out of nowhere." Christopher's face was a mask of concern, but his mind was on logistics. Get in, get the best doctor, throw some money around, and get out. This was an inconvenient but manageable interruption. His phone buzzed again. Jessica. He silenced it with a flick of his thumb. He'd call her back later and tell her he was stuck in a last-minute board meeting. It was his go-to excuse, and she never questioned it. Why would she? She was sweet, trusting, simple Jessica. The perfect, stable backdrop for his dynamic life. A team of orderlies approached with a wheelchair, their professionalism a stark contrast to Christopher's manufactured panic. "We need a private suite, the best one you have, and I want to see the chief of medicine immediately," Christopher demanded, already pulling out his platinum credit card as if it were a scepter. The lead orderly, a man with a calm, weathered face, simply nodded. "We'll take care of the patient, sir. Please see the admissions desk inside for the necessary arrangements." Christopher scoffed. Arrangements were for other people. Just bill whatever it is to this card. Davies. Christopher Davies, CEO of Kronos Innovations. The name should be sufficient. He expected a flicker of recognition, a change in posture, the deference he was so used to. He got none. The orderly focused entirely on settling Brooke into the wheelchair, his movements gentle and practiced. Brooke, for her part, offered a weak smile to Christopher, her eyes fluttering closed. As they wheeled her inside, Christopher followed, his expensive Italian shoes clicking impatiently on the polished marble floor. The lobby was less like a hospital and more like a five-star hotel. A cascading waterfall flowed down a granite wall, the sound a soothing murmur. Abstract art, the kind that cost more than a suburban house, adorned the walls. He strode to the main reception desk, a sweeping curve of polished mahogany. "I'm Christopher Davies," he announced to the receptionist, a poised woman with a headset. "The patient is Brooke Summers. I've requested the chief of medicine and a VIP suite. Please expedite this." The receptionist typed something into her computer, her expression unreadable. "1 moment, sir." Christopher tapped his fingers on the desk, his patience wearing thin. He wasn't used to waiting. He wasn't used to being treated like just another person. He looked around, noting the discreet brass plaque near the entrance, the Hartman Medical Center. A common name, he mused. Probably some long-dead philanthropist. It meant nothing to him. His phone buzzed a third time. A text message from Jessica. "Hey, just calling to check in. Hope the meeting is going well. The baby's kicking like a soccer player today. Call me when you can. Love you." A pang of something he refused to identify as guilt pricked at him. He quickly suppressed it. Jessica was fine. She was always fine. She was at home, nesting, doing whatever pregnant women did. She was safe. Brooke, however, needed him. It was a simple, self-serving justification, but it was enough. "Sir," the receptionist said, her voice pulling him back. "Dr. Peterson will be down to speak with you shortly. If you'd like to take a seat." "I don't want to take a seat." He snapped his voice a low growl. "I want a doctor for my friend. Is that so difficult to understand? Or do I need to speak to the person who runs this place and explain how customer service works?" The receptionist remained unnervingly calm. "Dr. Peterson is the chief of medicine, sir. She is the person you requested." Before Christopher could retort, a woman in a crisp white coat approached. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and grey-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her name tag read, "Dr. Ann Peterson, Chief of Medicine." "Miss Davies," she said, her voice level and devoid of the awe he expected. "I'm Dr. Peterson. I was told you had some concerns." "Concerns?" Christopher laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "My friend is in severe pain, and we're being held up by bureaucracy. I want her in a room, diagnosed and treated. Now. I'm prepared to pay any price." Dr. Peterson's gaze was steady. "All our patients are treated with the utmost urgency and care, Mr. Davies. Ms. Summers has been taken to an examination room in our emergency wing. A top diagnostician is with her now. We don't expedite care based on credit limits. We do it based on medical need." The polite professional condescension was infuriating. It was a language Christopher wasn't used to hearing. He felt his control, the very foundation of his world, slipping. "Perhaps you don't understand," he said, leaning closer, lowering his voice to an intimidating hiss. "I am a very influential man. A hospital like this relies on donors, on patrons. It would be a shame if a facility with such a fine reputation were to suddenly find itself with a very powerful, very vocal critic." Dr. Peterson didn't even blink. Instead, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards and knew it. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential, almost pitying tone. "You seem to be under a number of misapprehensions, but don't worry. I think they are all about to be cleared up." From down the hall, the quiet, rhythmic squeak of orthopedic shoes grew louder. A new figure was approaching. Christopher turned, expecting another doctor or an administrator he could finally intimidate. But the face he saw sent a jolt of ice-cold dread through his entire body. It was Jessica, his pregnant wife. And she wasn't smiling. Jessica moved with a quiet grace that Christopher had always mistaken for meekness. Her pregnancy had softened her features, but today her blue eyes, usually so warm, were as hard and cold as glacial ice. She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on Dr. Peterson. Anne, Jessica said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the sterile hum of the lobby. Is there a problem here? Christopher's mind raced, trying to compute this impossible scenario. What was Jessica doing here? A checkup, a false alarm with the baby. It had to be a coincidence, a terrible, universe-shattering coincidence. No problem at all, Jessica, Dr. Peterson replied, her tone shifting from professional coolness to one of genuine warmth and respect. Mr. Davies was just expressing his concerns about our hospital's procedures. Jessica's eyes finally settled on Christopher. The look in them was not one of surprise or hurt, not yet. It was a look of profound, weary disappointment. It was the look of someone whose worst suspicions had just been confirmed. My husband, Jessica said, the words perfectly articulated, can be very enthusiastic, especially when he's worried about a friend. The slight pause before the word friend was a scalpel expertly wielded. Christopher felt sweat prickle on his neck. He had to take control of this narrative, and fast. Jess, what are you doing here? I was just... A colleague from work, Brooke Summers. She suddenly collapsed. I had to rush her here. I was about to call you. He stammered the lie, tasting like ash in his mouth. Jessica's expression didn't change. You didn't have to call me Christopher. I was already here. I had my 32-week scan this afternoon. You would have known that if you'd read the text I sent you this morning. The text? He'd glanced at it, registered something about an appointment, and immediately dismissed it as non-urgent. His board meeting had seemed more important. The meeting ran long, sweetheart. It was unavoidable, he said, trying to inject a note of apologetic sincerity into his voice. He reached for her arm, a gesture of ownership and control. She took a small step back, avoiding his touch. The rejection was subtle, but in the silent, charged atmosphere of the lobby, it felt like a gunshot. Dr. Peterson, Jessica said, turning back to the chief of medicine, my husband was demanding a private suite and your personal attention for his colleague. Please make sure Ms. Summers receives the standard excellent level of care we provide to all our patients. No special treatment is necessary or warranted. Dr. Peterson nodded. Of course, Jessica. She then looked at Christopher. If you'll excuse me, I have other patients to attend to. Your friend is in good hands. With a final meaningful look at Jessica, she turned and walked away. The lobby suddenly felt vast and empty. The receptionist was studiously ignoring them. The waterfall seemed to mock him with its serene indifference. Christopher was left alone with his wife, and for the first time in their marriage, he felt utterly powerless. Jess, let me explain. He began, his voice dropping. Explain what? She asked, her tone dangerously quiet. Explain why your colleague is a 25-year-old aspiring model who you've been having lunches with for the past 6 months. Lunches that, according to your credit card statements, have been happening at boutique hotels. Or should we talk about the jewelry from Cartier that you bought last month? A corporate gift, I believe you called it. Christopher was stunned into silence. He had been so arrogant, so sure of his own cleverness, so dismissive of her intelligence. He saw her as the gentle, unassuming wife who managed their home and social calendar. He never imagined she was paying attention. He never imagined she was capable of this cold, analytical dissection of his deceit. How did you know? He whispered. A humorless smile touched Jessica's lips. You're not a careful man, Christopher. You're a careless one. You think because I don't run a tech company that I don't understand how the world works. That was your first mistake. She gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings. My family has been in the business of managing complex systems for a very long time." The way she said it sent a chill down his spine. Her family. The Hartmans. He'd met her parents a few times before they passed away. He remembered them as quiet old money types. Her father, Robert Hartman, had been a retired investor who, in Christopher's opinion, lacked any real killer instinct. Her mother had been a society woman, dedicated to charity. He had patronized them, seeing them as relics of a bygone era. He saw their wealth as old and stagnant, nothing like the dynamic, disruptive fortune he was building. He looked from Jessica's face to the brass plaque on the wall. The Hartman Medical Center. The name wasn't a coincidence. His mind was struggling to connect the dots. The name on the building, the deference Dr. Peterson showed Jessica, the way she had spoken of her family. It was like watching a puzzle assemble itself, and the final picture was one he couldn't comprehend. "Hartman," he said aloud, the name feeling foreign and heavy on his tongue. "This place, it's named after my father," Jessica finished for him, her voice flat. "He founded it 30 years ago. He and my grandfather built this entire medical foundation from the ground up." The foundation of Christopher's world didn't just crack, it shattered. He had married Jessica Hartman, seeing her as a pretty well-bred accessory to his life. He knew she had a trust fund, a comfortable inheritance he'd always mentally categorized as her little nest egg. He had no idea. He had been living in a palace thinking it was a cottage, and had never once bothered to look up at the ceiling. Your family owns this hospital," he stammered, the question sounding absurd even to his own ears. Jessica's gaze hardened. "Christopher, my family doesn't just own the hospital. We own the building, the land it's on, the pharmaceutical research lab in the West Wing, the medical supply company that stocks it, and the charitable foundation that oversees it all." She paused, letting the weight of her words land with the force of a physical blow. "I don't just have a nest egg. I am the chairman of the board. And you," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any scream, "just brought your mistress to my hospital." The words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from Christopher's lungs. Chairman of the board. The title seemed alien, impossible when applied to his wife. Jessica was the woman who organized dinner parties, who reminded him to call his mother, who was carrying his child. She was not a titan of industry. She couldn't be. His entire perception of their life together tilted on its axis. The quiet dinners with her parents, which he had endured with smug condescension, suddenly replayed in his mind. He remembered her father, Robert, speaking softly about endowment management and biotech portfolios. Christopher had dismissed it as the ramblings of a hobbyist. He now realized he had been a child, listening to giants discuss the creation of worlds. That's not possible," he managed to say, the denial a reflex. You handle charity balls, not board meetings. And you thought those charity balls, which raise 8 figures in a single night, just organize themselves?" Jessica countered, her voice sharp. "You saw what you wanted to see, Chris. A docile domestic wife who wouldn't ask too many questions. It was a convenient fantasy for you, and I allowed you to have it. That was my mistake." He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The simple, elegant dress she wore probably cost more than his suit. The quiet confidence he'd mistaken for passivity was actually the profound stillness of immense power. She hadn't needed his flashy world of venture capital and hostile takeovers. She had been living in a world of her own, one so far above his, he hadn't even been able to perceive it. "Why?" he asked, the question laced with a pathetic bewilderment. "Why wouldn't you tell me the extent of it?" "Tell you?" she asked, a genuine, bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I tried in the beginning. Do you remember when I tried to talk to you about the Hartman Foundation's new investment in robotic surgery? You patted my hand and said, "That's nice, honey," before spending the next hour boasting about a new app your company had acquired. You never asked a single follow-up question. You never showed a shred of genuine interest in my life, my family, or my legacy. You only ever saw me as a reflection of yourself. Every word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of his arrogance. He had been so blind, so wrapped up in his own self-importance. He thought he was the sun, and she was a minor planet caught in his orbit. The reality was that he had been a small moon orbiting a star he didn't even know was there. His phone buzzed. He instinctively glanced down. It was a notification from his bank. He ignored it. "So this is it," he said, trying to find some footing, some way to regain control. "You bring me to your kingdom to humiliate me." "Don't flatter yourself, Christopher. My day does not revolve around you," she said coldly. "As I told you, I had a doctor's appointment. You chose to bring your affair to my front door. This humiliation is entirely of your own making." As if on cue, a large, imposing man in a dark suit materialized beside them. He was built like a former linebacker, with a calm, watchful presence. He nodded respectfully at Jessica. "Mr. Henderson," she greeted him. "Is there an update? Ms. Summers has been diagnosed with mild dehydration and acute anxiety," the man Henderson reported in a low, rumbling voice. "Dr. Matthews has recommended she be given IV fluids and discharged within the hour." Mild dehydration. The entire dramatic life-or-death emergency that had ripped his afternoon apart was nothing more than a case of a young woman needing a glass of water. The absurdity of it all was a fresh wave of humiliation. "And her bill?" Jessica asked. "As per your instructions, it will be sent to Mr. Davies's personal account, not his corporate one," Henderson confirmed. Jessica nodded. "Thank you, Robert. Could you please escort my husband to the cafeteria? I believe he and I have a few more things to discuss, and I'd prefer a more private setting." "Of course, Mrs. Davies." Henderson turned his impassive gaze on Christopher. "Sir, if you'll come with me." It wasn't a request. Christopher looked from the mountain of a man to his wife. The power dynamic had shifted so completely it gave him vertigo. He was no longer a CEO in control. He was a misbehaving child being sent to the principal's office. He had no choice but to follow. The hospital cafeteria was as elegant as the rest of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a manicured garden. But Jessica didn't lead him to one of the comfortable booths. She guided him to a stark, functional table in a secluded corner under the unflattering glare of a fluorescent light. Henderson stood at a discreet but unmissable distance. Jessica sat down, placing her hands on her swollen belly in a protective gesture. She slid a sleek, dark blue folder across the table. "I had hoped to have this conversation under different circumstances," she began, her voice devoid of its earlier anger, replaced now by a chilling, businesslike tone. "I was hoping we could discuss this at home after the baby was born, but you've forced my hand." Christopher stared at the folder. He didn't want to open it. He knew that whatever was inside would be the final definitive end of the life he knew. "Jess, please." He tried, his voice hoarse. "We can fix this. I made a mistake. A horrible, stupid mistake. But we have a baby coming. Our family. Our family." She cut him off, her voice dangerously soft. "The family you were betraying while I was at home carrying your son. The family you neglected so you could play benefactor to a woman suffering from anxiety." She pushed the folder closer to him. "Open it, Christopher." With trembling hands, he opened the folder. The first page was a document from a forensic accounting firm. It was a detailed analysis of the finances of Kronos Innovations, his company. His pride and joy. His eyes scanned the columns of numbers, the highlighted transactions, the damning summaries. He felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just about his affair. This was about everything. The seed money for Kronos. Jessica said, her voice a clinical narration of his doom. You told me you secured it from a consortium of angel investors in Silicon Valley. A brilliant pitch, you said. They were begging to get in on the ground floor. He looked up at her, his heart pounding in his chest. But there were no angel investors, were there, Chris? She continued. The initial $5 million, the money that started it all, was funneled from one of my family's legacy trust accounts, an account you gained access to when we consolidated our finances after our wedding, an account you must have thought was just some forgotten pot of money. He couldn't speak. She knew. She knew his darkest, most foundational secret. He wasn't a self-made man. He was a thief. You didn't build an empire, Christopher, she said, her voice sealing his fate. You stole the foundation of one and built a shack on it, and the rent is now due. The sterile air of the cafeteria felt thick, heavy, and suffocating. Christopher stared at the forensic accounting report, but the numbers blurred into meaningless symbols. The only thing he could see clearly was the abyss that had opened up beneath him. The affair was a symptom. This was the disease. His entire success story, the narrative he had built his identity around, was a fraud. How could you do this? He whispered the question, ludicrously aimed at her, as if she were the perpetrator. Spying on me. Hiring accountants. You call it spying. I call it due diligence. Jessica retorted, her composure absolute. Did you really think I wouldn't keep an eye on the family trusts my father taught me to read a balance sheet before I learned to ride a bicycle? The discrepancies started small about 18 months ago. A few $100,000 here, $500,000 there. You were clever routing it through shell corporations. You probably thought it was an insignificant amount, lost in the noise of multi-billion-dollar portfolios. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. But it was a pattern, and it was my money. So I hired the best forensic accountants in the country. Not to spy on my husband, but to protect my family's assets from a potential threat. It turns out the threat was sleeping in my bed. He felt a desperate, primal urge to defend himself, to twist the narrative. I was going to pay it back. With interest. The company is a huge success. The valuation is through the roof. It was an investment. I used that money to build something incredible for us. For us. Jessica's laugh was sharp and brittle. Was the penthouse apartment you leased on the other side of town for us? Was the Porsche you bought Brooke for her birthday for us? Was this entire secret life you built on my family's money? For us. She gestured to the folder. It's all in there, Christopher. Every wire transfer, every gift, every hotel bill. They didn't just find the embezzlement from the trust. They found how you used it. You've been living a lie, and I've been funding it. Suddenly, the phone he'd placed on the table buzzed again, this time with a series of frantic notifications. He glanced down. Emails from his chief financial officer. Text messages from his bank. Urgent corporate accounts frozen. Credit card transaction denied. Amount $2,500. Merchant Cartier. Notice. Access to Kronos. Innovations. Primary operating accounts has been suspended pending an internal investigation. He looked up at Jessica, utter disbelief warring with dawning horror. "What did you do?" "I protected my assets," she said simply. The forensic report was presented to the board of the Hartman Foundation this morning. Given that the foundation holds a significant and until now silent partnership in Kronos Innovations, a little detail you must have missed in the fine print of the initial funding you stole, they voted to launch an immediate investigation into financial mismanagement. As the majority stakeholder, I had the authority to freeze the accounts to prevent further misappropriation of funds. Your CFO was notified 10 minutes ago. He had been checkmated in a game he never even knew he was playing. While he was racing his mistress to the hospital, his empire was being dismantled brick by the woman he had so fatally underestimated. "You can't do that," he said the words weak and powerless. "It's my company." "Is it?" she countered. "Is a house built with stolen materials truly owned by the thief? According to my lawyers, it's a very grey area. And Christopher," she added, her voice dropping, "my lawyers are much, much better than yours." As if summoned, another man approached the table. He was sharp and impeccably dressed, carrying a slim leather briefcase. This was David Chen, the Hartman family's lead counsel, a man known in legal circles as a shark who never lost. "Jessica," David said with a respectful nod, before turning his cool, assessing gaze on Christopher. "Mr. Davies." "David, thank you for coming," Jessica said. "I believe you have some documents for my husband." David Chen placed his briefcase on the table and opened it with 2 precise clicks. He pulled out a thick sheaf of papers and placed it squarely in front of Christopher on top of the accounting report. "Mr. Davies." The lawyer began, his tone formal and devoid of any emotion. "These are divorce papers. They cite infidelity and financial fraud as the primary grounds. All shared assets which, upon review, appear to have been purchased with funds originating from Mrs. Davies's inheritance or trusts have been frozen by court order. This includes your homes, your vehicles, and your personal investment portfolios." He slid another document forward. "This is a restraining order. You are to remain at least 500 feet away from Mrs. Davies and all her properties, including your marital home, effective immediately." Christopher's world narrowed to the stack of paper in front of him. Divorce, frozen assets, restraining order. Each word was a nail. "The marital home. You're kicking me out of my own house," he choked out. "The house was purchased by the Hartman Trust as a wedding gift for me, Christopher. Your name was never on the deed. You were a guest," Jessica said softly. "The party is over." He felt a surge of useless rage. "You'll regret this, Jessica. I'll fight you. I'll take you for everything you've got. I'll tell the world what you are." David Chen spoke before Jessica could. "I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Davies. Any attempt to slander Mrs. Davies would be met with a defamation lawsuit of a magnitude you can no longer afford to fight. Furthermore, we have not yet filed the criminal complaint for embezzlement. My client has been gracious enough to hold off on that for now. For the sake of her unborn child, she would prefer to handle this civilly. But if you choose to make this difficult—" He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Her graciousness has its limits, and a federal prosecutor would be very interested in this forensic report." Prison. The word wasn't spoken, but it echoed in the space between them. Christopher looked at Jessica, the mother of his child, and saw a stranger. A woman with the power to not only ruin him, but to utterly erase him. His bravado crumbled, replaced by a desperate, pathetic plea. "Jess, don't do this. Think of the baby." "I am thinking of him," she replied, her voice finally cracking with a sliver of raw emotion. "I am ensuring he is born into a life of honesty and integrity. I am protecting him from a father who is a liar, a cheat, and a thief. He will know his grandfather's legacy, not his father's shame." She stood up, her movement slow and deliberate. "Robert will show you out," she said, gesturing to Mr. Henderson, who had remained a silent statue nearby. "Your personal effects from the house will be sent to an address of your lawyer's choosing. Do not try to contact me again. All communication will go through David." She turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving Christopher sitting alone at the table with the ruins of his life laid out on paper. He was no longer Christopher Davies, the tech mogul. He was just a man in a hospital cafeteria, stripped of everything. Realizing he had not only lost a fortune, but he had lost a queen he never even knew he had. The walk out of the Hartman Medical Center was the longest walk of Christopher's life. Mr. Henderson shadowed him, a silent, immovable presence that ensured there would be no scenes, no outbursts. People in the lobby, the same people who would have once vied for his attention, now glanced at him with curiosity, their eyes lingering on his pale face and the formidable man escorting him. He was no longer a VIP. He was a problem being managed. When he reached the entrance, his Aston Martin was gone from its imperious spot in the fire lane. A valet, a different one from before, approached him, holding a single key. "Your vehicle has been moved to the long-term parking garage level P4, sir," the young man said politely. "The charges have been handled. Just like everything else." He snatched the key and stalked towards the parking garage, the humiliation burning in his gut. Inside the concrete structure, he found his car parked neatly between the lines, looking suddenly less like a symbol of power and more like a gaudy, useless toy. He slumped into the driver's seat, the smell of expensive leather now nauseating. He tried his phone. He called his CFO, Mark. It went straight to voicemail. He called the head of his legal department. Voicemail. He called his personal banker. A polite but firm assistant informed him that all his accounts were under a temporary hold, and she couldn't provide any more information. The wall was absolute. Jessica had built it, and it was impenetrable. He sat in the silence of his car for what felt like an hour, his mind a maelstrom of rage and disbelief. He had been so thoroughly and systematically dismantled. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act of revenge. This was a long-planned, meticulously executed strategy. Jessica, his quiet, unassuming wife, had been watching him gathering evidence and laying the groundwork for his destruction for months. The affair hadn't been the cause. It had merely been the trigger. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold dread through him. She hadn't just reacted to his infidelity. She had been preparing for his betrayal on a fundamental level long before Brooke was ever in the picture. She had known what he was. His thoughts turned to Brooke. What was he going to do about her? He had brought her here promising to take care of her. Now he couldn't even afford to pay for her IV drip. He pulled up her contact, his thumb hovering over the call button. What would he even say? "Sorry, darling, the billionaire you've been seeing is a fraud whose wife just cut him off completely. Good luck with the dehydration." Before he could decide, a call came through. It was Brooke. "Chris, where are you?" Her voice was shaky, but the dramatic weakness was gone, replaced by an edge of anxiety. "They're discharging me." They handed me a bill. An actual bill. Can you believe it? They said I had to sort it out with admissions, and some huge guy in a suit told me I needed to leave the premises immediately. What is going on? Christopher closed his eyes. The small, manageable drama he had walked in with had been swallowed by a cataclysm. "I'm in the parking garage, Brooke. There's been a complication," he said, his voice flat. "A complication? What does that mean? Is this about that woman I saw you with? The pregnant one? Was that your wife?" The questions came in a rush, laced with accusation. She was no longer the damsel in distress. She was a co-conspirator whose getaway driver had just been arrested. "Yes, that was my wife." He admitted the words, feeling like gravel in his throat. "And what happened? Did she make a scene? Are you okay?" "She didn't make a scene, Brooke. She made a phone call," he said bitterly. "It turns out she owns the hospital and the bank that holds my company's accounts. And as of about an hour ago, she owns my entire life." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. He could almost hear the frantic calculations happening in her head as she processed this new world-altering information. What, you're kidding, right? This is some kind of sick joke." "I wish it were," he said, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical weight. "My accounts are frozen. The company is in lockdown. I've been served with divorce papers. I'm locked out of my own house." "Your house? But what about my things?" She asked the question so purely self-interested, it was almost comical. "I left my new Dior handbag in the foyer." Christopher almost laughed. A handbag. He was facing financial ruin, public disgrace, and possible jail time, and she was worried about a handbag. In that moment, he saw Brooke for exactly what she was, a beautiful, shallow opportunist who had attached herself to his wealth, just as Jessica had said. "I don't think you'll be getting it back, Brooke," he said wearily. "Listen, I can't do this right now. I have to figure things out." "Figure things out? What about me, Chris?" Her voice rose, becoming shrill. "You made me promises. You said you were leaving her. You said you were going to take care of me." "Promises I can no longer keep." He snapped, his patience gone. "The man you thought I was doesn't exist anymore. You're on your own." He hung up the phone before she could reply, tossing it onto the passenger seat. The silence that followed was absolute. He had no one to call, no one to help him. His business partners would scatter the moment the news of the fraud investigation broke. His friends were social climbers who would drop him the second his name was tainted. He was an island, and the tide was coming in. He finally started the car, the powerful engine roaring to life. But he had nowhere to go. He couldn't go home. He couldn't go to his office. He couldn't even check into a hotel, not with his credit cards frozen. He drove aimlessly out of the garage and into the late afternoon traffic. The city, his city, a place he had once commanded from penthouse boardrooms and exclusive clubs, now felt alien and hostile. Every gleaming skyscraper seemed to mock him, a testament to a world he was no longer a part of. He was a ghost haunting the streets of his former life. News alerts began to pop up on his car's display screen. Kronos Innovations halts trading pending internal review. CEO Christopher Davies under investigation for financial misconduct. The ripple effect was becoming a tidal wave. Jessica hadn't just exposed him. She had launched a surgical strike designed for maximum immediate impact. The business world moved at the speed of information, and his reputation was already being shredded. He pulled over to the side of a busy street, overwhelmed. He thought back to that morning. He had woken up a king. He had put on a $1,000 suit, drunk his custom-blended coffee, and looked at his reflection, seeing a master of the universe. Now he was nothing. A man with a fancy car, he probably wouldn't be able to afford gas for by next week. It was a fall so swift, so total, that his mind could barely grasp it. And the architect of it all was the one person he had never, not for a single second, considered a threat. The quiet woman carrying his child. Brooke Summers stood outside the imposing glass doors of the Hartman Medical Center, her thin silk blouse offering little protection against the sudden chill of the evening breeze. The bill from the emergency room was clutched in her hand, a crisp, mocking piece of paper detailing the exorbitant cost of IV fluids and a doctor's 5-minute consultation. Her phone was silent. Christopher hadn't answered her last 3 frantic calls. Her carefully constructed world, built on promises whispered over champagne and backed by the solid weight of Christopher's black card, was dissolving like sugar in the rain. She had seen herself as the heroine of a romance novel, the beautiful young woman who captures the heart of a powerful, trapped man and helps him escape his dreary, passionless marriage. She had imagined a future of sun-drenched villas, front-row seats at Fashion Week, and the envious glances of her peers. The woman she had seen in the lobby, Jessica, had shattered that fantasy. There was nothing dreary or passionless about her. Brooke had seen the steel in her eyes, the effortless authority in her posture. That wasn't the neglected wife from Christopher's stories. That was a queen surveying her domain. And Brooke, in her flimsy designer dress and feigned illness, had been nothing more than a court jester making a fool of herself. A taxi pulled up to the curb. She got in, giving the driver the address to the downtown penthouse Christopher had leased for their trysts. It was her only sanctuary, the only place filled with things he had bought her. Perhaps he would go there. Perhaps this was all a terrible, elaborate misunderstanding. But when the taxi arrived, her keycard flashed red. Access denied. She tried again. A cold knot of panic tightened in her stomach. She called the building's concierge, a man who had always greeted her with a fawning smile. "I'm sorry, Ms. Summers," he said, his voice now clipped and professional. "We received a notification from the leaseholder this afternoon. Your access has been revoked effective immediately." "But my things are up there," she protested, her voice rising. "My clothes, my jewelry. Arrangements will be made to have your personal belongings packed and sent to you. We will need a forwarding address," he said coolly. And then the line went dead. She was locked out, stripped of her access as cleanly and efficiently as Christopher had been. This wasn't just Jessica's anger. This was a scorched earth campaign. Defeated Brooke slumped against the cold marble wall of the building's exterior. The life she had been living for the past 6 months was an illusion. She hadn't been Christopher's partner. She had been a line item on an expense report, a luxury he had purchased with stolen funds. And now that the funds were gone, so was she. She thought about the other women in her circle, the ones who dated wealthy, powerful men. They had always warned her. "Get it in writing," they'd say. "Make sure you have your own account." She had laughed at them, convinced that her connection with Chris was different. It was real. He loved her. He was just waiting for the right time to leave his wife. How naive she had been. She had been so captivated by the performance of wealth and power that she never bothered to look behind the curtain. She had taken his stories about his simple wife at face value because it fit the narrative she wanted. She had been a willing audience for his lies. Her phone buzzed. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought it was Chris. But it was a notification from a gossip blog, the kind she followed religiously. The headline was a dagger. Tech CEO Christopher Davies' empire crumbles amidst allegations of massive fraud. Wife philanthropist Jessica Hartman files for divorce. The story was already out. It was brief but brutal. It mentioned Kronos Innovations' frozen accounts, the sudden investigation, and the divorce filing. It painted Christopher as a charlatan, and Jessica as a quiet powerhouse, the unsuspecting heiress to the Hartman fortune who had finally uncovered her husband's deceit. Brooke's name wasn't mentioned, but she knew it was only a matter of time. She was the loose thread in the story, the other woman. The paparazzi would find her. Her face would be splashed across tabloids, not as a rising star, but as a home-wrecking gold digger. The scandal would cling to her like tar poisoning any chance she had of a legitimate acting career. She hadn't just lost a benefactor. She had lost her future. A wave of bitter resentment washed over her. Resentment towards Christopher for his lies and his weakness. Resentment towards Jessica for her power and her perfectly executed revenge. But underneath it all, a small, hard kernel of resentment was reserved for herself. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Or in this case, she had been thrown out of it and locked out of the building. With no other options, she called the one person she knew she could always count on, the person she had been avoiding for months, because her life had seemed too small and too ordinary. Her sister. "Hey, Katie," she said, trying to keep her voice from breaking, when her sister answered. "Yeah, it's me. Listen, I know it's last minute, but can I come and stay with you for a few days? It's a long story." As she hailed another taxi this time to take her to a modest apartment in the suburbs, Brooke Summers finally understood. In the high-stakes game between Christopher and Jessica, she had never been a player. She was just part of the collateral damage. For the next 48 hours, Christopher Davies existed in a state of suspended animation. He found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city that still accepted cash, a relic of a bygone era. The room smelled of stale smoke and despair. He, a man who had once complained if his hotel suite didn't have a view of the park, now stared at a peeling wallpaper landscape of a faded beach. His phone was a relentless torrent of bad news. His story was the lead on every financial news network. Pundits who had once lauded him as a visionary now picked apart his career, recasting him as a reckless gambler and a fraud. Former colleagues and so-called friends released statements distancing themselves from him and Kronos Innovations. He was radioactive. He finally managed to get a lawyer on the phone, a harried public defender his old legal team had recommended in a terse 2-sentence email. The man, an overworked but decent lawyer named Ben Carter, laid out the grim reality. "The evidence the Hartman legal team has is overwhelming, Mr. Davies," Ben said, his voice tinny over the phone. "The paper trail for the embezzlement is pristine. They have you dead to rights on the civil fraud. Your only saving grace right now is that Mrs. Davies hasn't pressed criminal charges. My advice, don't provoke her. So I just roll over. Let her take everything," Christopher demanded, pacing the threadbare carpet of his motel room. "Frankly, sir, there's nothing left to take. It was never yours to begin with," Ben stated bluntly. "The company was built with her money. The house is hers. The cars were purchased from accounts funded by her trust. We can fight to get you some personal effects, maybe a severance from the company you technically founded, but it will be pennies on the dollar. They are in a position of absolute strength." Absolute strength. The phrase echoed in his mind. He thought of Jessica, of her calm, unyielding face in the cafeteria. He had mistaken her gentleness for weakness, her kindness for naivete. He now understood that her gentleness was a choice, a luxury afforded to her by a foundation of unshakable power. He had been the weak one all along, propped up by her resources, blinded by his own ego. On the third day, a courier delivered a box to his motel room. It contained a few of his old suits, some books, and a small framed photo from the early days of their marriage. In the photo, he and Jessica were laughing on a beach, young and full of hope. He looked at the man in the picture, the man with the genuine smile, and felt like he was looking at a complete stranger. When had he lost that person? When had the ambition curdled into greed? The confidence into arrogance? Tucked inside the box was a simple, handwritten note on plain stationery. Christopher, this is the last time you will hear from me directly. Enclosed are the final divorce papers. Sign them. If you sign them without a fight, the criminal charges will not be pursued. You will be left with the small personal savings account you had before we were married, which amounts to roughly $70,000. That is all. Consider it a final act of mercy, not for you, but for the child who will one day have to know you are his father. Do not try to see the baby after he is born. David will arrange supervised visitation in a neutral location when and if I deem it appropriate. This is not negotiable. Jessica. $70,000. To the man he had been a week ago, it was a bar tab. Now it was his entire world. The note was not cruel. It was clinical. It was the final closing of a deal, the termination of a bad investment. She had excised him from her life with the precision of a surgeon. He sat on the lumpy bed, the divorce papers in his hand, and he finally, truly understood. This wasn't about the affair. The affair was just the final ugly symptom of his betrayal. He had betrayed her trust, her family's legacy, and the very foundation of their marriage. He had taken her quiet, steadfast love and used it as a cover for his own insecurities and greed. There was no fight left in him. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, aching emptiness. He had built his life into a magnificent tower, but he had done it on sand. And the tide had come in. He picked up the cheap pen from the motel desk, its plastic casing feeling flimsy and foreign in his hand. He flattened the papers on the stained nightstand, and with a trembling hand signed his name. He signed away his company, his home, his fortune, and his family. He signed away Christopher Davies, the tech mogul. When he was done, all that was left was Chris. A man in a cheap motel room with $70,000 and a lifetime of regret stretching out before him. The stripping of the king was complete. He was left with nothing but himself, and it was a self he no longer recognized. 6 months later, Jessica Hartman stood at her office window, her infant son Robert sleeping peacefully in a bassinet nearby. The world outside was painted in the crisp colors of autumn, a season of change that mirrored her own. She was no longer the wife of a CEO. She was the formidable chairman of the Hartman Foundation, a leader in her own right. The scandal had settled. Kronos Innovations. The hollow monument to Christopher's ego was absorbed and rebranded. As Hartman Future Technologies, it was now a powerful arm of the foundation, its purpose redirected from flashy apps to meaningful medical innovation. The empire built on a lie had been remade into a legacy of substance. News of Christopher was a whisper. He had taken the pittance she had left him and disappeared into a life of anonymity in a small Midwestern town. He signed the divorce papers without a fight, and out of shame or cowardice, had not once asked to see his son. He was a ghost erased from the life he had tried to corrupt. Dr. Ann Peterson knocked gently before entering, her eyes warm. "The new pediatric wing is officially opening next week," she said with a smile. The dedication plaque looks wonderful. Jessica looked from her friend to her son, a profound sense of peace settling over her. She had faced betrayal and had not just endured. She had built something better from the ruins. She had protected her family, her child, and her legacy. The storm was over, and in the quiet aftermath, Jessica Hartman, mother and leader, was finally truly home. What a story of deceit, hidden power, and ultimate justice. Jessica's journey shows us that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet, observant force that changes the world. Christopher's spectacular downfall is a powerful reminder that a life built on lies is a house of cards ready to collapse at the slightest breeze. He didn't just lose his money, he lost the one person who was his greatest asset, and he never even knew it. What do you think about Jessica's actions? Was her response perfectly calculated justice, or was it a cold, brutal revenge? Could Christopher ever redeem himself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of hidden strength and shocking revelations, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a good story. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for listening.